Well, fuck me gently with a chainsaw. Today's video talks about the Big Bang Theory, autism, the persecution complex, and bad character analysis all in one go. My approval cue is gonna be just fucking lovely. The Big Bang Theory is second only to Family Guy and Teen Titans Go on list of shows that are exorbitantly popular and well-received, yet you can't go 5 seconds without tripping over some half-assed think piece about why it's the worst show ever. It's a show where you'll find no shortage of people ready to write paragraphs about how terrible it is, and yet somehow it remains the highest-rated primetime sitcom on TV. As is the case with the aforementioned Family Guy and Teen Titans Go, you should be skeptical whenever geek culture seems to universally decide that a show is terrible. I've always been suspicious at how so many people can hate a show that they simultaneously claim not to watch, and yet seem to have enough working knowledge of it that they can write out paragraphs of negative criticism for. This is because in 90% of cases, they're getting their criticism from somebody else and just repeating it ad nauseum. Just recently, I had a conversation from someone about a scene from The Big Bang Theory involving Leonard and an FBI agent who could not seem to remember anything that happens in the scene, yet simultaneously believed it to be a scene where Leonard was derided for being a quote-unquote beta male, when in reality he was being derided for harassing a woman at work. So I want to dedicate time on this show to shooting bad criticism of The Big Bang Theory full of holes, and today I want to start with one of the more insidious pieces. Among that subset of copypasta is the prevailing attitude that Sheldon Cooper is a minstrel show style offensive caricature of people with autism. This tends to ring as a surprise among the autistic people in my social circle, as well as a lot of people who work with autistic kids and teenagers, as it's a well-known fact that psychiatrists, counselors, and all sorts of educators have used Sheldon as a simple and direct way of communicating the most basic fundamental aspects of autism to people just learning about it for the first time to great success. Let's unpack that cognitive dissonance, shall we? One of the things that makes Sheldon so contentious is the fact that the writers have adamantly refused to say that Sheldon is on the autism spectrum, but a lot of people on the crew, including Jim Parsons, have all just accepted the idea that he is and direct him that way anyway. You can see this in the way Sheldon seems incapable of intuitive thinking, while his ability to analyze and absorb raw data is unmatched by anyone else in the group. This is the common root symptom of autism that almost every other symptom stems out from, blown up to extremely hilarious proportions because this is a sitcom and subtlety is not this genre's strong suit.
Our world is coming crumbling down. The coons are coming.
If some people can be stupid enough to think we're supposed to sympathize with Archie's racism despite being constantly dressed down for it, or worse, think we're supposed to sympathize with Howard, Leonard, and Raj's early season misogyny despite constantly being punished for it, then it's probably better for everyone if more complicated topics like autism are handled with as little subtlety as humanly possible so that there's no way that Joe and Jane Dumbfuck could possibly miss it. Like I did earlier when I described the root of most symptoms of autism being a diminished capacity for intuition. That is an extremely simplified way of explaining it that I coined myself. Some people might argue that this only perpetuates negative stereotypes of people with autism, but does it? Let's take a very recent example. In the 10th season, Sheldon makes Amy upset by discussing private matters with other people. In response to this, Sheldon brings a chart to Amy to map out which topics of conversation are appropriate to discuss with certain people that he calls his zones of privacy. This scene is genius. For one, just like most scenes involving Sheldon, it makes it very clear that the rules of basic social etiquette are something he struggles with, but not out of malice. What is and isn't appropriate to discuss with who is one of those social protocols that we're all expected to pick up intuitively. In fact, almost every rule of social interaction is something we're all expected to learn on our own, intuitively. Nobody tells us what these protocols are until we break them, usually as children. For people with autism, that just doesn't work. It's a common misconception that people with autism struggle with social development when in reality they can grasp the nuances of social interaction perfectly fine, provided you actually teach it to them. The problem is we don't do that. We just expect children to teach themselves on the playground during recess. This scene with Sheldon's zones of privacy indicate that he knows where the root of his problems lie and counteracts it by turning intuitive information into data he can analyze. This isn't just an important scene for people with autism to make it clear where their strengths lie, but also an important lesson for neurotypical people that, yes, despite what you've probably heard from Autism Speaks, you can totally teach this stuff to someone with autism, but not if you approach it in the same way you would approach it with a neurotypical person. Despite the complaints that Sheldon's over-the-top presentation perpetuates negative stereotypes, in practice the opposite is often true. I used to volunteer with a mental health organization that provided education and day treatment to kids and teenagers with autism. When parents brought their kids in, oftentimes the inciting incident that brought them to us was realizing that their child was exhibiting similar traits as Sheldon, and that acted as sort of a light bulb incident. Additionally, one of the most common issues that teenagers who were diagnosed in their teens often face is failing to grasp precisely what, if any, their issues are. Because Sheldon has all the the subtlety of a brick in a tumble dryer, he serves as a very easy way to demonstrate these things to people. The number of times someone almost immediately started doing better because we use Sheldon as a baseline foundation is innumerable. And yes, all of this is anecdotal evidence, but anecdotal evidence is better than nothing, especially considering that the hatred for the Big Bang Theory has become a meme at this point. There's a big important factor that makes Sheldon so useful. People like Sheldon, and not in a love-to-hate kind of way. They genuinely and unironically like him. Some of the most adored and applauded episodes of the Big Bang Theory are the episodes where Sheldon experiences a breakthrough in personal and social growth. We want to see him overcome his obstacles. We want to see him learn the skills he struggles with. And when he succeeds, it's a wonderful and applause-worthy moment. They're some of the best moments in the series. Sheldon is the character people want to see succeed. Leonard and Penny getting married was almost breezed through on the series. Sheldon proposing to Amy was a massive season-ending cliffhanger. Sheldon is adored because he's constantly making strides in personal growth, not just in his social etiquette, but also his aversion to physical contact and his many other eccentricities. Not all of his behavior really needs to be worked on, but all of it has formed the basis of a very well-defined character arc. One episode shows Sheldon making a huge faux pas about Emily's career and spending the rest of the episode learning how to apologize without accidentally giving a massive backhanded remark, which is a reflection on an early episode where Sheldon is adamantly against apologizing because he believes what he said to be true.
I'm not going to apologize. I didn't say anything that wasn't true.
Now you listen here. I have been telling you since you were 4 years old. It's okay to be smarter than everybody, but you can't go around pointing it out.
Why not?
Because people don't like it. You don't remember all the ass kickings you got from the neighbor kids?
In fact, Sheldon's behavior and symptoms aren't that exaggerated in the first place. They're just not all that accurate to the way adults behave. They're extremely accurate to the way small children on the autism spectrum behave. This is why Sheldon has been so effective as an educational tool, because he behaves very similar to the people who need the education in the first place. The thing about Sheldon is that psychiatrists don't use him to teach themselves how to educate people. They use him to educate people they've only just diagnosed or who are hearing about autism for the first time in their lives. Sheldon was never meant to be a complete and nuanced look into autism. He was never meant to be a look into it at all. The writers just accidentally fell into it by virtue of the genre they're writing in. But he ends up being a 101 course for the most common issues people face, blown up to their logical extreme to make it extremely easy to comprehend. Taking an honest look at the way Sheldon is portrayed, yes, he annoys the crap out of his friends sometimes, and there have been moments where someone will give him a dressing down for how exhausting he can be. Are we gonna try and pretend that this hasn't been the norm for sitcoms, or really all dialogue for decades? Are we gonna try and pretend that some variation of this doesn't happen in real-world conversations? I mean, you can delude yourself into thinking that relationships are supposed to be these perfect conflict-free utopias, or you can come and join us in the real world where arguments like this happen regardless of whether you're neurotypical or not. People with autism sometimes say or do things that create bad social situations. Instead of telling children that this doesn't actually happen and it's all an invention by evil Hollywood, we should be telling children that it's not the end of the fucking world unless you happen to befriend a complete and total sad sack.
You have no idea how much you inconvenience the lives of everyone around you. It's exhausting.
You know what? You think you're so tolerant, but the truth is, you're mean to me a lot. Yeah, you think that I don't notice all those sarcastic comments and those eye rolls, but I do. I have excellent peripheral vision.
Sheldon, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. I've been holding a lot of this in for a while.
Either way, I want you to know that I'm aware of how difficult I can be. So I just want to say thank you for putting up with me.
Buddy.
But ultimately, this is all a waste of time. You see, nothing Sheldon could possibly do will ever be good enough for some people. Most of these people don't actually want an accurate or useful look into autism. They ultimately don't care about good representation or representation that helps anyone. What they want is cheerleading. There's a show on Netflix called Atypical about a high schooler with autism who is still going through the becoming well-adjusted phase that Sheldon goes through on The Big Bang Theory. Because the show is explicitly about a boy with autism rather than accidentally, it goes into a lot more detail regarding the various different symptoms. Now, this is a far more nuanced and interesting look into autism because the show is deliberately wanting to discuss that concept, and it does a relatively good job of it. It does suffer from one minor flaw. Autism affects everyone differently, but Sam is the only autistic character on the show, which means he has to exhibit every possible symptom that the writers want to talk about. This kind of storytelling issue would be easily fixed by having 2 or 3 autistic characters rather than just one, so you aren't shoveling everything you want to talk about onto one character's shoulders. Despite that, however, Atypical succeeds in what it wants to be. If Sheldon Cooper is the beginner's course for understanding how autism affects people, Sam Gardner is the intermediate lesson. Unfortunately, despite all the praise, Atypical is still being lambasted as stereotypical by the same breed of critical hacks who hyper-focus on the fact that Sam showcases every possible symptom of autism, and the presentation plays it up a tiny bit. Now, I just explained to you why that happens. There's only one character they have to work with. That's the writer's fault, but it's not a fault that really loses any points because, just like with Sheldon, most people are already aware that mental atypicalities like this always affect people in different severities, and if you're watching a show that is explicitly about autism, you already know the basics, so these writing issues cease to actually be issues. All of these common sense conclusions get ignored. Why is that? Well, let's look at one more show for the answer. Friendship is Magic. Friendship is Magic is ground zero for neurodivergent headcanons and people armchair diagnosing characters with mental illnesses, disorders, and atypicalities. I love that word. What I find interesting about Friendship is Magic is that one of the members of the main six gets a ton of autism headcanons. Princess Twilight. Now, when I first heard this, I was surprised because Twilight is the single most neurotypical person in the entire goddamn show, even with the stringent adherence to schedules and routines and the minor anxiety attacks. Most of her neurological issues are pretty minor to the point of being practically mundane, and all the symptoms of autism people cite, like a difficulty with social cues and social interaction or a hyperfixation on one particular subject, just flat out aren't there. They don't exist in Twilight. The people who claim it is are either really dense or actively lying. What makes this even more interesting is that both of these symptoms and more are very explicitly demonstrated by another character in the cast. Rainbow Dash. Rainbow Dash has had entire episodes on her inability to properly process social cues and often displaying complete obliviousness to her own behavior, and she fixates on the Daring Do books the moment she's introduced to them, becoming a more devoted fan than the pony who got her into it. If there was ever a character in Friendship is Magic to be considered for the autism spectrum, it would be Rainbow. Yeah, by most standards it's extremely mild and relatively downplayed, but it's there. But not a peep from the people who make headcanons. Weird. Now, what do these three characters all have in common? That's right, they have to learn from the mistakes they make. They screw things up and have to fix them. They grow as characters and steadily become more well-adjusted. What does Twilight have to learn regarding behaviors commonly associated with autism? That's right, nothing. Just like in real life, these three characters' symptoms can cause problems for them. It can interfere in their life in smaller, substantial ways, and they have to learn to adjust and cope with that. They have to learn the skills that everyone else picks up naturally. They have to find new ways to process information their brain otherwise struggles with processing. In real life, every single person with autism has to go through this process, regardless of the severity of their symptoms, and this can either be extremely easy to the point of trivial or extremely difficult. It relies on two factors. One, the willingness of the support system around you to properly educate you, and two, the willingness of yourself to put in the effort to learn. And that second one is the problem here. Every now and then you come across an autistic person who doesn't want to put in the effort, who wants to just give up and expects everyone else to bend around them. This is not a symptom of autism. This is a lazy and unmotivated person who just happened to have it. These are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of people, and you can easily spot them because out of the massive, diverse pool of studies and research surrounding autism that have been done over the past few decades, they have read none of it, and they are always ranting about autism speaks. Their sole dubious claim to expertise regarding autism is the biologically unimpressive achievement of having it. Oh, hi, Dunning-Kruger. We haven't seen you here in a while. They latch onto a character like Twilight because she doesn't need to learn these skills. She exhibits minor quirks and suits the narrative they've built up in their own head. It's not an accurate portrayal of autism. It's not even an accurate portrayal of these people specifically. An accurate portrayal of them would be Zephyr Breeze. Saying that Twilight is a valuable representation of autism is like saying the Demon Hunters are a valuable representation of the visually impaired. A character like Sheldon implicitly tells people that coping and becoming well-adjusted is relatively straightforward provided you can be bothered to put in the effort. You can deal with this stuff, and some people don't like hearing that. They don't like hearing that they've got stuff to work on. They don't like hearing that it's their responsibility. They look at Sheldon's friends holding him accountable for his actions and putting the responsibility on him to improve, and they don't want to hear that. Misery is comfortable. It's why so many people prefer it. Happiness takes effort. When offered two paths to self-improvement, both of which are difficult, some people would rather just stay put. Anyone who claims the Big Bang Theory is contributing to negative stigmas of autism is either lying or stupid. Autism Speaks has been around and spreading delusional propaganda long before the Big Bang Theory went on the air. Anti-vaxxers are most certainly not looking to Sheldon for their confirmation bias. The kind of delusional bugger cunts who think a bleach enema is appropriate for their autistic children are not being encouraged by a sitcom where autism is treated as a mundane, everyday thing thing that everyone's just adjusted to. If you think Sheldon is in any way helping these people spread their delusional bullshit, or worse, you think it's on the same level as their delusional bullshit, you are a fucking moron. Thankfully, those people never reach outside their bubble. Characters like Sheldon continue to be used as positive and practical teaching tools to a lot of kids and teenagers to an astounding amount of success. As much as some corners of the internet may continue to pretend that Sheldon is some kind of blackface version of autism, the people who are in positions to influence other people's lives know better than that. I think in general, a lot of people hate the Big Bang Theory because it airs out their dirty laundry. Nobody wants to admit that they know someone like Howard or Raj, or that they could be that person themselves. They also don't want to put in the work to better themselves or their culture. They just want to continue whining about the people who bullied them. And the Big Bang Theory is notable in that it won't let you do that. If you behave the way most of these four behave in the first few seasons, this show explicitly and brutally holds you down for a pummeling. Engage in very obvious bullying, someone's gonna notice and won't keep quiet. Exhibit a lot of sexist behavior, you'll get everything from disgusted looks to verbal lashings to flat out physical consequences. That last one is notable because any sexist behavior on the Big Bang Theory is almost immediately followed up by consequences. There's this think piece on YouTube called The Adorkable Misogyny of the Big Bang Theory that tries to posit that the Big Bang Theory tacitly supports sexist behavior. How does this thesis contend with the fact that almost every instance of sexist behavior is immediately followed up by consequences, and those consequences invoke a lot of laughter? It doesn't. It just writes it off as lampshading and often deliberately scrubs important parts of scenes it talks about. It is the most diabolically lazy thing I have ever seen, and that's intentional because you won't know how much complete and total bullshit is being spewed unless you've bothered to watch the series past the first episode. And if you're watching a video essay on why the Big Bang Theory is horrible, you probably haven't.